They believed in the finality of the ultimatum. Admiral Eva Rostova watched the Cathar fleet resolve on the main tactical display of the TVN accountability. They were precisely what the doctrine promised: monolithic, unyielding, and utterly silent. Each Cathar vessel was a shard of obsidian geometry, absorbing the light of the distant Vespian star and giving nothing back. Her own fleet, the 19th Reconciliation Fleet, was a collection of silver needles and articulated rings, poised but not aggressive, designed to de-escalate, to teach, and to leave if necessary. This time leaving wasn't the mission. Report. Rostova's voice was calm, a stark contrast to the low thrum of the ship's gravitic anchor vibrating through the command deck floor. Commander Jin, her executive officer, stood beside her, his gaze locked on the chronometer projected in the display's corner. No change, Admiral. The Cathar fleet holds its blockade line at 10 million kilometers. They have not responded to any of our 47 standard hails. The ultimatum timer stands at 3 hours 11 minutes and 42 seconds. Behind them, the low hum of the bridge was punctuated by the quiet clicks of console interfaces. The scent of ozone and chilled coolant hung in the recycled air. The stakes were simple and brutal. A convoy of 300,000 Cygnian refugees, their generation ships lumbering and vulnerable, was trapped behind the Cathar line. The Cathar ascendancy had declared the entire Vespian corridor a purification zone, and the Cygnians' flight path had inadvertently crossed it. Their ultimatum was delivered: once vacate the sector or be erased. Humanity sent a different message. Fleet-Mind Argos. The ship's integrated consciousness spoke through the bridge emitters. Its voice was a synthesized baritone, eternally patient. Admiral, my calculations remain firm. A direct kinetic engagement results in a 92% probability of catastrophic losses for the Cygnian convoy. The Cathar fleet's capital ships outmass ours by a factor of 3. We aren't here for a kinetic engagement, Argos Rostova said, her eyes never leaving the Cathar ships. We are here to present a counter-argument. She could feel the faint tremor of the mirror lattice arrays shifting into final alignment, a subtle vibration that ran through the bones of her vessel. The Cathar believed in the ledger of violence where ultimatums were paid in annihilation. Humanity operated on a different accounting principle. They would teach them how to balance the books. Before the tension had mounted on the bridge, Rostova had reviewed the feed from the Cygnian flagship, the Wanderer's Hope. A small child, no older than 5 standard years, with wide, liquid dark eyes and delicate feathered ears, was pressed against a viewport. She was watching the distant silver forms of the Terran ships, her small hand leaving a foggy print on the reinforced crystal. Behind her, her mother wrapped a thin blanket around her shoulders. Her own expression, a mixture of profound fear and a desperate, fragile trust placed in strangers. The image was a stark reminder of the 300,000 lives hanging on every decision made in the next 3 hours. The weight of it settled in Rostova's bones, a familiar ache she had carried across a dozen star systems. Commander Jin confirmed the convoy is spooled for the burn. Rostova ordered. Inform their fleet captain to begin on our mark, not a second sooner. Aye, Admiral. They're scared, but they're holding steady, Jin replied, his fingers dancing across his console. The light from his screen cast his focused features in a blue glow. The Cathar are broadcasting their ultimatum on a repeating loop system-wide. It's stark. Stark is their way, Commander. It's the only language they've used for a century. Rostova took a slow breath, the suit's internal regulators providing a soft hiss of air. Argos, begin the overture. Let's give them something to watch. The universe does not blink, so neither would they. The accountability and its 14 escort frigates began to shimmer. From the outside, it was a subtle effect, a heat haze coalescing around the fleet. Internally, it was a massive surge of power drawn from the ship's singularity core and channeled into the stellated mirror lattice. The hum on the bridge deepened the vibrations, becoming a tangible presence. Millions of microscopic intelligent mirrors were aligning, preparing to sculpt energy and light into a grand deception. The Cathar doctrine was based on overwhelming force applied to a single predictable point. Rostova's plan was to give them 1,000 points to look at none of them real. Phase 1 is active, Argos announced. We are projecting ghost signatures, Admiral, replicating our fleet's energy profile, tripling our apparent numbers. On the tactical display, the cluster of human ships blossomed. Ghostly duplicates flickered into existence, perfectly mimicking the heat, energy, and communication chatter of real vessels. They arrayed themselves in a deliberately provocative formation, a spearhead aimed directly at the center of the Cathar blockade. It was a textbook assault posture, one so obvious and suicidal that only a fool would attempt it. The Cathar were many things, but they were not fools. They were, however, rigidly predictable. Their pride was a weapon to be used against them. Hold positions. Let them process the data, Rostova murmured. Let their doctrine tell them what they're seeing. For 10 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. The Cathar fleet remained immobile, their obsidian hulls betraying no reaction. The countdown clock ticked down each second, a hammer blow against the silence. The tension on the bridge was a physical weight thick enough to toast. The crew remained silent, their trust in their commander absolute, but the strain was visible in the tightness of their shoulders and the focus in their eyes. Then the Cathar moved. 2 of their heavy cruisers detached from the main line, gliding forward with implacable certainty. They were moving to intercept the most aggressive-looking of the ghost fleets. They were not firing. They were simply asserting their dominance, their physical presence, a statement of inevitable consequence. They were closing the account before it was even fully opened. They're taking the bait. Jin breathed a hint of relief in his tone. They are acknowledging the data, Rostova corrected gently. This isn't a trap to them. It's an equation they are programmed to solve. This is where the old math failed. The Cathar cruisers reached the optimal firing range for their primary particle beams. Still, they held their fire, their doctrine demanding a final moment for their enemy to acknowledge their own folly and retreat. This was their form of mercy, a final chance to bow to the inevitable. But the Ghost Fleet did not retreat. It accelerated. Argos, now Rostova, commanded. The instant the command was given, the Ghost Fleet dissolved into a cascade of fractured light. In its place, a new image bloomed, a corridor. It was a projected pathway of absolute sensor silence, a channel carved directly through the Cathar's blockade line, seemingly leading to open space. It appeared as a perfect, inviting escape route for the Cygnian convoy. It was a lie, of course, a carefully constructed illusion, painted with light and energy by the mirror lattice. The real escape path was elsewhere entirely. They offered a bridge of light built from a lie. The Cathar cruisers, momentarily confused by the Ghost Fleet's disappearance, immediately retasked their sensors. The silent corridor was an anomaly they could not ignore. Their doctrine screamed at them that it was a feint, a trick. But their ultimatum was absolute, and the presence of the refugee convoy was the core violation. They had to close any and all potential escape vectors. They began to shift their formation subtly at first, then more decisively to collapse the perceived opening. Their rigid line began to bend. "The anchor is dragging," Admiral Jin reported, his voice tight with anticipation. Their formation is becoming disorganized as they pivot to cover the feint. Their doctrine is forcing them to honor the illusion, Argos stated. They cannot abide an unknown variable. The probability of them spotting the real transit window has now dropped to 4%. The real corridor was a narrow slice of space on the far flank of the Cathar fleet, masked by the system's primary radiation belt. It was a dangerous path requiring a high-G burn that would test the structural integrity of the old Cygnian ships. But it was the only path the Cathar were not watching. A lesson is only as good as the student's willingness to learn. Signal the convoy. Rostova's voice rang with newfound command. Execute the burn. Full thrust. Get your people home. She watched the civilian ships on her display, their engine signatures flaring to life. They began to move slowly, at first, then gathering speed, a stream of tired, hopeful vessels aiming for a treacherous path to freedom. They were the payload, the entire purpose of this delicate, dangerous dance. The weight of their 300,000 lives felt heavier than a star. A Cathar destroyer on the periphery, faster and more agile than its larger brethren, finally registered the convoy's true vector. Its own logic, momentarily freed from the fleet-wide focus on the illusion, screamed at it to act. A lance of pure particle energy, a warning shot of impossible brightness erupted from its forward emitter. It wasn't aimed to kill, but to disable, to force the lead Cygnian ship to a halt. Commander Jin flinched. Admiral Inbound Energy Spike, the frigate TVN Refraction, one of the convoy's close escorts, reacted instantly. It threw itself into the path of the beam, its own mirror lattice flaring from silver to a blinding incandescent white. The ship's frame shuddered under the strain as it absorbed and dispersed the Cathar's aggressive message. The cost was immediate. Alarms blared across the refraction's channel, its heat sinks glowing a furious cherry red. The portside hull was visibly scorched, a dark mar against its pristine silver surface. It was wounded, but it held the line. They paid the price to keep the promise. The convoy surged past, disappearing into the cover of the radiation belt. They were through the blockade. The first part of the lesson was complete. The Cathar had been so focused on the threat of a direct confrontation that they had failed to protect against a simple misdirection. Their rigid doctrine had been turned into a swoj, forcing them to look one way while the truth slipped past in the other direction. The lead Cathar overlord, its ship, a vast bladed monstrosity at the heart of their fleet, finally broke its silence. A single powerful broadcast washed over the human fleet, bypassing all standard diplomatic channels and embedding itself directly onto their main view screen. It was not a voice but a symbol, the Cathar sigil for total annihilation, glowing a venomous crimson. The ultimatum hadn't been rescinded. It had been escalated. Argos analysis. Rostova said, her voice a low hum of controlled calm. They are redeploying their entire fleet, Admiral, the AI replied. They are no longer forming a blockade. They are forming a kill box. Furthermore, they are unlocking their primary weapon systems. Our initial scans did not account for this energy signature. It is a system-wide resonance cascade. The Obsidian ships began to move with a new terrifying purpose. Arrays unfolded from their hulls, vast structures that began to pulse with a sickly purple light. The very fabric of space-time in the corridor began to feel thin. The gentle thrum of the accountability's own systems was now joined by a discordant high-frequency whine from the void outside. Their failure to teach demanded a louder lesson. They've closed the ledger on the blockade, Jin said, his hand resting on the tactical console as if to steady himself, and opened a new one under extermination. They believe the cost of their failure is our destruction, Rostova corrected. They have not yet learned that every debt can be reflected. She looked at the Cathar fleet, no longer a static line, but a contracting web of energy. The first lesson had been subtle, a lesson in focus and assumption. This next one would have to be more direct. She could feel the righteous anger cold and clear solidifying in her chest. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. It was an old Fleet Academy axiom, a core tenet of their philosophy. The Cthar had collared themselves with their own doctrine. Now they would be shown the math of their error, and the final sum would be tallied for the entire galaxy to see. You cannot threaten those who came to teach you about consequences. Before turning her full attention to the unfolding tactical nightmare, Rostova opened a private channel to the refraction. "Captain, report your status." The voice that came back was strained, laced with the hiss of static from overloaded systems. "Heat sinks are critical, Admiral. Portside armor is compromised, but the lattice held. We have burns. Medical team is managing 3 crew members with radiation exposure from a conduit breach. We're still in the fight." "Understood." Captain Rostova said, the image of the scorched hull seared into her mind. It was another entry in the ledger, another cost to be balanced. "Your crew's courage has been noted. Hold your position and prepare for the second movement." She closed the channel, the quiet bravery of the Refraction's crew a sharp counterpoint to the Cthar's monolithic rage. That was the difference. Her crew fought for the people behind them, not for the purity of a doctrine. It is the debt of the strong to protect the hopeful. Argos Rostova began her gaze sweeping over the contracting Cthar formation. The convoy is clear of the immediate threat, but they will not survive that resonance cascade if it reaches full power. The Cthar are turning this entire corridor into a detuning fork. How do we turn their weapon inside out? The fleet mind processed for a full 3 seconds. The silence on the bridge was absolute. Every officer waited, knowing that the next words would define the boundary between survival and a very quiet, very permanent end. The dissonant whine from the void outside grew louder, a sound that seemed to vibrate directly in the bones. It was the sound of a star system being prepared for surgery with a butcher's knife. The cascade weapon functions by creating sympathetic resonance points. Argos explained its tone as even as ever. It identifies the precise quantum frequency of a target's hull and amplifies a destructive wave that will tear it apart atom by atom. It is designed to be inescapable. To counter it, we would need to create a perfect reflection of its primary wave timed to the nanosecond. "A perfect reflection," Rostova repeated. "Our mirror lattices are precise, but are they capable of that level of mimicry against a weapon we've never seen?" Under normal circumstances, the probability of successful inversion is 1.7%, Argos stated flatly. The energy required would be astronomical. We would have to absorb their initial volley process, its complex wave structure, and broadcast a perfect inverse all before the original wave impacts. They were being asked to solve an equation while standing inside the eraser. Jin's face was pale. 1.7%, those are not odds. That's a rounding error. Rostova's eyes narrowed. She saw the trap, the elegant, brutal simplicity of the Cthar doctrine. They had presented a problem with only one logical answer: defeat. They had learned from the first encounter and had now created a scenario where deception was impossible. A resonance cascade was not a beam to be dodged or a missile to be shot down. It was a wave that washed over everything. But the doctrine was still a doctrine. It had rules, it had assumptions, and every assumption was a potential flaw. "They assume we will try to shield ourselves." Rostova thought aloud, her voice barely a whisper. "They expect us to turtle up, to absorb, to try and weather the storm. They are waiting for us to cower behind our mirrors." They expected fear. "We brought a calculator." "Argos, you said the weapon identifies a target's quantum frequency. How specific is that process? She asked, a new idea beginning to form sharp and dangerous. Extremely specific, the AI confirmed. It must lock onto the unique atomic signature of a ship's hull composition to initiate the cascade. A Terran frigate has a different signature than a Cygnian colony ship, which is different from a Cathar cruiser. Rostova's lips curved into a grim, thin smile. So what would happen if we gave it the perfect target, she asked. What if we held up a mirror not to the weapon, but to the user? Silence again. Jin stared at her, his eyes wide with dawning comprehension. Argos ran the numbers, the low hum of its processing core in the deck plates, a subtle counterpoint to the rising shriek of the Cathar weapon array. The whine was beginning to make the bridge lighting flicker. Admiral Argos said, a new inflection in its voice, something that might have been surprise. If we were to reconfigure the entire fleet's mirror lattice into a single cohesive parabolic reflector, and if we modulated our own signatures to perfectly mimic the quantum frequency of the Cathar overlord's hull, the cascade would lock onto its own command ship as the primary target. Rostova finished. The weapon would see its own reflection and attack it with perfect, brutal efficiency. It was a gamble that would rewrite the rules of war. The energy requirements would be immense, Jin cautioned, though the pallor was gone from his face, replaced by a fierce light. We'd have to drain our reserves, leave ourselves almost defenseless if it fails. The Cathar doctrine is about inescapable consequence, Commander Rostova said, her voice ringing with cold iron. We are simply going to ensure the consequence is delivered to the correct address. She turned to face the tactical display, where the Cathar fleet was now a closing fist of malevolent purple light. The countdown clock from the initial ultimatum was gone, replaced by a new terrifying metric, a system-wide energy saturation gauge that was rapidly climbing. Argos, plot the firing solution. Slave the lattices of the entire fleet to my command, she ordered. Jin, open a fleet-wide channel. I want every crew member to hear this. The bridge grew quiet, save for the hum of the ship and the rising scream of the void. Rostova stood tall, the weight of 1,000 decisions settling into a single point of action. She had come here to teach a lesson about mercy. The Cathar had refused the gentle hand. Now they would get the fist. A reckoning is not an attack. It is a correction. The fleet-wide channel chimed open. Every sailor on every ship in the 19th Reconciliation Fleet, from the engineers in the Singularity Corps to the pilots in their ready rooms, would hear her voice. This is Admiral Rostova. The Cathar have chosen to escalate. They seek to unmake this system and everyone in it simply because their pride was wounded. They believe their doctrine is a law of physics, an absolute truth of the universe. We know better. She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. The ship vibrated around her, a living thing bracing for impact. The console in front of her showed the mirror lattices of 14 ships slaving together, creating a single vast invisible dish aimed at the heart of the enemy. Their weapon is designed to be a perfect killer seeking out a unique signature to destroy. We will not hide from it. We will not block it. We will show it the signature it truly seeks its own. The mirror does not judge. It only returns what it is given. Brace for energy convergence. On my mark, we will show the Cathar the true meaning of inescapable consequence. Her voice was not loud, but it filled every corner of the fleet with unshakable resolve. She closed the channel and looked back at the tactical display. The Cathar energy levels were approaching 90%. The final moment was upon them. Argos, she said, her voice now a low whisper, meant only for the bridge. Are we ready to become the mirror? The lattice is converged, Admiral. We are one cohesive reflection, the AI confirmed. We are currently broadcasting the quantum signature of the Cathar Overlord Executioner's truth. The moment they fire their own weapon will target them. The whine from outside reached a crescendo, a sound that threatened to crack the very viewports. The purple light of the Cathar fleet coalesced, and then with a silent, terrible fury it discharged. A wave of pure, de-resonating energy, vast and unstoppable, erupted from the Cathar formation, sweeping across the 10 million kilometers of empty space in an instant. It was not a beam or a projectile. It was the void itself screaming. It was the ultimatum given physical form. For a fraction of a second, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The wave washed over the Terran fleet. The lights on the Accountability's bridge flickered violently, and the deck plates groaned in protest. The heat shields flashed, overwhelmed by the sheer ambient energy, but the mirror lattice held. It did not block. It did not absorb. It caught the monstrous complex wave of the Cathar weapon, and with all the stored power of the fleet's cores, it sculpted it into a perfect inverted copy and sent it screaming back toward its origin. The Cathar overlord, the executioner's truth, was the epicenter of the reflected wave. Its own weapon, designed to be the ultimate expression of its doctrine, found its perfect target. On the tactical display, the Overlord's crimson icon flashed. It did not explode. It simply came apart. The sympathetic resonance tore through its hull atom by atom, causing a catastrophic failure of every system simultaneously. The monolithic shard of a ship dissolved into a silent, expanding cloud of superheated chi and shattered metal. Their doctrine had finally and perfectly executed itself. The cascade effect was immediate. With the command ship gone, the resonance weapon collapsed, the sickly purple light vanishing as if it had never been. The remaining Cathar ships, suddenly freed from the weapon's network, faltered. Their perfect, aggressive formation broke. Confusion and chaos rippled through their fleet as they witnessed their own ultimate sanction turned upon its master. They had watched their god weapon kill their godship. The bridge of the Accountability was silent, save for the frantic hiss of coolant pumps working to bleed off the incredible heat load from the lattice. A scent of burnt ozone filled the air. Warning icons flashed across a dozen consoles reporting strained systems and microfractures in the mirror arrays. The cost had been high, pushing the fleet's technology to the absolute breaking point. But the result was undeniable. Status of the Cathar fleet. Rostova's voice cut through the stunned silence. Jin, wide-eyed, stared at his board. They are chaotic, Admiral. Multiple ships are breaking formation. I'm reading panicked, low-level comms chatter. They are completely disorganized. They have ceased all aggressive action. They had never written a paragraph for this chapter. They have lost their anchor, Argos stated. Their doctrine did not account for a scenario in which the ultimatum giver is the one executed. Their entire command structure has been decapitated by their own philosophy. Rostova watched the once terrifying fleet of obsidian shards as it devolved into a panicked mob. She felt no triumph, only a profound, weary sadness. They had forced her hand. They had refused the gentle lesson, and so they had received the harsh one. The ledger was balanced, but the price had been steep, written in scorched hulls and irradiated crew members on her side, and in total paradigm-shattering collapse on theirs. Open a channel to the entire Cathar fleet. Rostova commanded, her voice regaining its steady, measured tone. Broadcast on all their frequencies. No encryption. Let the whole sector hear it. She paused, composing the words, choosing them as carefully as a surgeon chooses a blade. This was the moment the lesson was cemented, the moment the numbers on the ledger were given their meaning. This was not a victory. It was a verdict. This is Admiral Eva Rostova of the Terran Reconciliation Fleet. She began, her voice carried across the void to every confused Cathar vessel. You came here today to enforce an ultimatum. You believed that consequence was a weapon you alone could wield. You were wrong. She let the silence stretch a space for her words to sink in. On the view screen, the scattered Cathar ships drifted, their movements aimless and uncertain. Consequence is not a weapon. It is a mirror. Today you fired upon that mirror and it showed you your own reflection. Your flagship is destroyed. Your commander is gone. Your doctrine is broken. This was not our doing. This was the result of your own choices tallied and returned to you. She leaned forward slightly, her hands resting on the cool metal of the command console. The low hum of the accountability was a steady, reassuring presence beneath her feet. The Cygnian convoy is gone. They are not your concern. Your concern now is yourselves. You have a choice. You can continue down this path, lashing out in confusion and anger, and we will continue to reflect your actions back upon you. Or you can learn. You can accept this accounting and choose a new path. You cannot escape the math of your own making. We are not your executioners. We are your accountants. The debt has been paid for today. We are offering you a chance to close the ledger. Take your fleet and go home. Reflect on what has happened here. We will not pursue. We will not punish. She stood back, her message delivered. The offer is now on the table. The choice is yours. Rostova out. She cut the transmission, leaving the Cathar fleet to stew in the silence and the wreckage of their flagship. The silence on her own bridge was one of profound respect. The crew had seen the righteous anger, and now they were seeing the mercy that always followed. That was the human way. A hand offered, but a fist held in reserve. Admiral Jin said, his voice soft, "Do you think they'll take it?" "Their doctrine has failed them, Commander. For the first time in a century, they have no script to follow. They will have to think for themselves." Rostova turned away from the screen. "Now let's get a full damage report. And get me the casualty list from the refraction. The ledger isn't truly closed until we've accounted for our own." They remembered the cost always. The Cathar fleet remained in disarray for another 17 minutes. To Rostova, it felt like an eternity. Each second was a space in which a desperate Cathar captain could make a foolish, violent decision. The 19th Fleet remained on high alert, their damaged but functional mirror arrays ready to respond. They held their breath, a fleet of silver needles waiting for the verdict on their lesson. Then slowly, one by one, the Cathar ships began to turn. Their movements were clumsy, lacking the crisp, brutal precision of before. They turned away from the human fleet, away from the path the Cygnian convoy had taken. They pointed their bows toward their own territory. Without a word, without a signal, the once mighty Cathar Ascendancy blockade fleet began the long, quiet retreat home. They were a fleet of shattered certainty, leaving the Vespian corridor in silence. A lesson had been delivered. For the first time, it appeared the students had been listening. But the galaxy was a big school, and the day's exam was far from over. Admiral Argos's calm voice cut through the quiet relief on the bridge. "I am detecting a priority communication from Sector Command. It is flagged as urgent, overriding all other traffic." Rostova nodded, a sense of foreboding, chilling the warmth of their victory. A single isolated victory was rarely the end of the story. "Put it through Argos, on my private channel." She turned to a side console as the data streamed in. It wasn't a voice communication. It was a data packet, dense and heavily encrypted. As Argos decrypted it, lines of text and tactical maps began to populate her screen. What she saw made the blood run cold in her veins. The Cathar fleet in the Vespian corridor was not their primary force. It was a detachment, a regional patrol. The data packet contained fresh intelligence. The Cathar Grand Armada, a force 10 times the size of the one they had just faced, had broken from its traditional territory. It was not on patrol. It was on a direct course for the Kepler Truss, one of humanity's most vital interstellar transit hubs. And leading it was the Ascendancy's supreme overlord himself aboard a vessel that dwarfed the executioner's truth. Their ultimatum was not for a single corridor. It was for humanity itself: withdraw from all contested systems or face total war. The confrontation here had not been the main event. It had been the overture. Their reflection had been noticed, and now the original was coming. Rostova stared at the intelligence report, the cool light of the console reflecting in her wide, unblinking eyes. The victory in the Vespian corridor felt hollow now, a skirmish before an apocalypse. The 19th Fleet had not put down a rogue enforcer. They had merely bloodied the nose of a charging behemoth. Jin moved to her side, his own face grim as he read the incoming data over her shoulder. The low, victorious hum of the bridge had been replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a pressure against the eardrums. A Grand Armada Jin whispered the words tasting like ash. Supreme Overlord Koth-Voral himself. They are not just enforcing a corridor. They are demanding a tithe of stars. They are issuing their final ultimatum. Rostova corrected her voice a blade of ice. They believe our response here was an aberration, a statistical anomaly. Now they bring the full weight of their logic to bear to prove their doctrine is immutable. The scent of recently vented coolant was sharp in the air, a reminder of the battle just won, and the strain her ships had endured. The accountability was running hot, its systems taxed. The refraction was wounded, its crew nursing burns and mending scorched metal. Her fleet was in no condition for a second larger engagement. The universe does not care if you are tired. It only asks if you are ready. Argos calculate transit time to the Kepler Truss at maximum sustainable thrust. Given our current operational status, Rostova ordered her mind already racing ahead, leaving the ghost of the Cathar blockade behind her, factoring in system-wide energy debt and structural fatigue. On the refraction, the fastest possible transit is 37 standard hours, the fleet mind replied. The Cathar Grand Armada will arrive in 39. We will have a 2-hour operational window before they are in position to begin their purification protocol. A 2-hour head start. Against a force 10 times their size. It wasn't a window. It was a prayer. It's not enough time to fortify, Jin stated the obvious. The Truss is a civilian hub, not a naval base. Its defensive grid is designed to deter pirates, not an armada. We are not going there to fortify, Commander Rostova said, her gaze distant, fixed on a tactical solution that did not yet exist. We are going there to set a stage. They could not win a fight, so they had to change the war. On the Kepler Truss, a orbital city of spun diamond filaments and cascading biodomes, life continued in its vibrant, chaotic rhythm. A young grav welder named Alara was finishing her shift on the outer hull, her magnetic boots clamped to a maintenance gantry. Below her, the station was a swirl of lights, a jewel hanging in the velvet black. She watched a luxury liner detach from a docking arm, its running lights blinking a slow farewell as it prepared to enter the transit gate, a shimmering ring of contained space-time 1,000 kilometers away. Her younger brother was on that liner heading to the university on Xylos. She waved a small, foolish gesture in the vacuum, knowing he couldn't see her, but doing it anyway. The warmth of the station's life support radiated faintly through the soles of her boots, a constant, reassuring presence. She was safe. She was home. The idea that a storm was gathering just beyond the horizon of her reality was an impossibility too vast to contemplate. The innocent, do not see the oncoming tide. The first lesson was about reflection, Argos Rostova said, pacing the now quiet bridge of the accountability. They were hours into their desperate burn toward Kepler, the ship's engines pushing a steady, powerful thrum through the deck. We showed a small part of their fleet the consequence of their own weapon. Koth-Voral will be expecting that. He will have accounted for it. He will not make the same mistake. Correct, Admiral Argos confirmed. The Supreme Overlord's flagship, the inevitable verdict, is not merely a weapons platform. My analysis of the preliminary intelligence suggests it is a mobile doctrine engine. It doesn't just network their weapons, it networks their minds. The Grand Armada acts as a single unified consciousness, with Koth-Voral as the ego. A hive-mind bound by doctrine, Jin mused, studying a projection of the Cathar flagship. It was a terrifying vessel, a city-sized weapon shaped like a talon. How do you reason with a mind that has 1,000 bodies and a single unchangeable thought? You don't, Rostova replied, stopping her pacing. A flicker of an idea born from the AI's description ignited in her mind. You don't reason with it. You overwhelm it. You give it a problem so vast, so personal, that its single thought fractures into a million screaming contradictions. A single crack can shatter the strongest lattice. Her plan began to take shape not as a military strategy, but as a piece of psychological warfare. The Kepler Truss was not a fortress, but it had assets. It was the busiest civilian transit hub in the sector. It had the most powerful sensor and communication arrays outside of sector command. It was a place designed to see, to hear, and to broadcast. They believe in the public ledger, the grand statement, Rostova said. Their ultimatums are always broadcast for all to see. They want witnesses to their power. We will give them an audience they cannot ignore. She looked at her officers, her eyes burning with a cold, clear fire. We are going to turn the Kepler Truss into a mirror, not for their weapons, but for their souls. The journey was a blur of frantic preparation. Damaged systems were bypassed, power conduits were rerouted, and every ounce of processing power the fleet possessed was slaved to Argos. The crew worked in grim, determined silence, the memory of the refractions wounded fueling their resolve. They were no longer a reconciliation fleet. They were a single, sharpened instrument of defiance aimed at the heart of an empire. They held the line because they knew what was behind it. As they entered the Kepler system, the sight of the Grand Armada met them. It was a vision of geometric horror. Hundreds of obsidian ships arranged in a perfect concentric web, with the talon-shaped inevitable verdict at its center. They were not moving to attack. They were simply present. Their existence in the system was the ultimatum itself. A system-wide broadcast began the voice of Koth-Voral, deep and resonant as a funeral bell. People of Terra, your vessel of false accountability has taught a flawed lesson to my subordinates. This was an error. There is only one lesson: the ascendancy is the immutable truth. The Kepler Truss and the billions of lives within this system are now on the ledger. You will withdraw all fleets from our designated purification zones. You will cede the contested territories. You will do this now, or we will balance the account. A countdown timer appeared on every public and private screen in the system. 72 hours. Their arrogance was the chink in their armor. They are giving us 3 days, Jin said, his voice strained. It's a demonstration. They want the galaxy to watch us squirm, to see us abandon our own people. They are giving us time to prepare the theater, Rostova countered. Argos, begin the integration. Slave the Truss's primary communication array to our systems. I want every sensor, every public feed, every traffic control monitor under our control. Integration is proceeding, Admiral Argos reported. The station's administrators have granted us full authority. They are Cooperative. They are terrified, Rostova corrected softly. Commander, signal the fleet. We are not hiding. We are not running. We are making ourselves visible. The 19 ships of the Reconciliation Fleet moved from their position behind Kepler's moon and took up a station directly between the Cathar Armada and the Kepler Truss. A tiny silver shield before a tidal wave of obsidian. It was a gesture of such profound, suicidal defiance that for a full hour the Cathar did not react. They simply watched their doctrine, unable to process an enemy that refused to acknowledge its own certain doom. A challenge is an invitation to a dialogue. They cannot refuse. Rostova's plan was audacious. It was not a trap of mines or kill zones. It was a trap of information. For the next 36 hours, as the Cathar held their menacing watch, Argos and the fleet's technicians worked. They didn't build defenses. They built a database. They pulled the public census data for the entire Kepler system. Every life, every name, every profession, from the governor of the primary planet to the grav welder on the truss's outer hull to the child on a transport ship heading for university. 4.7 billion individual lives, each one a story. The ledger is built. Admiral Argos announced 24 hours before the ultimatum's deadline. Every soul in this system is now a data point in our network. Good Rostova said, a strange calm settling over her. Now link it to the main broadcast array. When the time comes, we will show them exactly what they intend to purchase with their doctrine. They would pay their price in witness, not in blood. The civilian vignette had played out in Rostova's mind 1,000 times. Ilara the welder finishing her shift. Her brother safe on his transport learning about ancient history, unaware that he was about to become a part of it. The countless others on the truss living their lives under the shadow of a silent, waiting death. These were not statistics. They were the stakes, and Rostova would not let them become collateral. She would make them the entire point. With 6 hours left on the clock, the Cathar began to move. Their outer rings of destroyers and cruisers began a slow, inexorable advance. They were not charging. They were herding, collapsing the space around the human fleet, and the truss tightening the net. Their movements were flawless, 1,000 ships moving as one. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. They are preparing the field, Jin reported, his knuckles white where he gripped his console. They expect us to break and run, to sacrifice the truss to save ourselves. It's what their doctrine would predict. Our doctrine is a little different, Rostova said. Hold your positions. Brace for the overture. The steadfast heart is a shield the enemy cannot scan. The Cathar reached their final positions. Silence descended once more. The countdown clock on the system-wide broadcast hit 1 minute. The entire galaxy was watching. Sector Command was watching. Races that had cowered before the Cathar for centuries were watching. It was the spectacle Koth Voral had wanted. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The ultimatum expired. Koth Voral's voice boomed across the system again. Your time is concluded. The ledger will now be balanced. Witness the cost of defiance. The talon-shaped flagship at the center of the armada began to glow. A resonance cascade far more powerful than the one in the Vespian corridor began to build. But Rostova was not looking at the weapon. She was looking at the audience. Argos, she said, her voice ringing through the bridge. Now. There is no ultimatum against the truth. The Kepler Truss's massive broadcast array, hijacked by the 19th Fleet, roared to life. But it didn't send a message of defiance or a plea for surrender. It hijacked Koth Voral's own broadcast. The image of the countdown clock vanished, replaced by a single simple image, a photograph of a young woman with dark hair and a determined smile, her welding torch held over her shoulder. Underneath it, a name appeared: Elara Vance, Gravitic Welder Kepler, Truss Maintenance Division 7. Then another image: a young man in a university uniform laughing with friends. Kenji Vance, student of Xenohistory, passenger on TVN Star Singer. Then another, and another, and another. A flood of images, names, lives. A doctor, a cargo hauler, a teacher, a newborn child in a medical bay. The broadcast split the images, multiplying a mosaic of faces, each one a unique, irreplaceable soul. The feed was not just system-wide. Argos was pushing it into the Galactic hypernet, overriding every channel, every newsfeed. The audience Koth-Vorol had gathered was now seeing not the power of his fleet, but the humanity of his victims. On the Cthar flagship, Supreme Overlord, Koth-Vorol watched his grand statement be replaced by a storm of faces. His doctrine was about the impersonal macro-scale balancing of accounts. Power, territory, resources. He did not deal in individuals. His weapon was primed to erase a statistic for 7 billion souls. But now that statistic had a face. It had 10 faces, 1,000, 1,000,000. The ledger had been given a voice. What is this? Koth-Vorol's voice for the first time held a note of something other than absolute certainty. It was confusion. It was irritation. Rostova's voice cut into his broadcast, calm and clear, carried on the same wave as the endless stream of faces. This is the ledger you wished to balance, Supreme Overlord. This is the cost. Look at them. We will not allow you to erase them as a number. You will witness every single life you intend to take. Their names will be your legacy. The resonance weapon was building the space around the inevitable verdict, beginning to warp and whine. But something was wrong. The single, unified consciousness of the Cthar fleet was faltering. The individual captains, the drone-like minds, networked to their overlord, were now being flooded with data their doctrine had no way to process. They were warriors prepared to annihilate a strategic asset. They were not prepared to look into the eyes of a billion children and pull the trigger. Doubt is the only poison that can kill a perfect doctrine. Cease this irrelevant broadcast, Koth-Vorol roared, his anger washing across the comms. Fire the weapon. But the weapon did not fire. An admiral on a nearby cruiser, his mind momentarily severed from the overlord's absolute will by the sheer cognitive dissonance, hesitated. His ship's power contribution to the cascade faltered for a microsecond. It was a tiny crack in the monolithic structure of the Grand Armada's unity, and it was all Argos needed. The network is fluctuating, Admiral, the AI stated. I have an opening. Execute, Rostova ordered. The 19th Fleet's mirror lattices flared to life, but they weren't reflecting energy. They were focused into a single needle-thin beam of data. It wasn't a weapon. It was a message aimed directly at the crack in the Cthar Hive-Mind. The message was simple. It was the full, unredacted personnel file of the Cthar admiral who had just hesitated. His family line. His honors. His own face displayed for a nanosecond. The message was clear. We see you too. The Cthar admiral recoiled as if physically struck. His individuality, a concept suppressed by the doctrine of the collective, had been acknowledged by the enemy. It was a violation more profound than any weapon. Their greatest strength was a single point of failure. The data beam, guided by Argos, began to leap from ship to ship, exploiting every flicker of hesitation, every momentary disconnection, from the Overlord's will. It profiled every Cathar captain, every ship commander in the Armada. It wasn't an attack. It was an introduction. The unified mind of the Armada was being forcibly disaggregated, broken down into its thousands of component parts. The broadcast of human faces continued a relentless tide of empathy washing against the shores of their rigid ideology. Fire the weapon now. Koth Voral's voice was a shriek of pure rage. His will, focused and absolute, tried to regain control, to force his subordinates back into the comforting anonymity of the collective. The resonance cascade pulsed, reaching its final charge, but it was unstable. The energy contributions from the fleet were no longer perfectly synchronized. The weapon designed to be the ultimate expression of unity was being poisoned by the individuality of its users. The inevitable verdict in a final act of supreme will tried to fire the weapon alone. A distorted, chaotic wave of energy erupted from the talon-shaped ship. But it wasn't a clean, system-wide wave. It was a malformed, unstable blast directed wildly. The Terran frigate Steadfast, holding its position at the edge of the human formation, saw the blast coming. Its captain made a choice. All power to the lattice, reflect it back at the source. He yelled. The Steadfast became a star, its mirrors glowing, with impossible energy as it caught the brunt of the failed cascade. The ship groaned its hull, screaming in protest. It held for a single glorious second, reflecting the poisoned energy back toward the inevitable verdict. Then its systems overloaded, its singularity core breached, and the TVN Steadfast vanished in a silent, brilliant flash of light. A promise kept is a debt paid in full. The reflected energy combined with the unstable cascade from the Cathar flagship created a feedback loop. The inevitable verdict shuddered violently. Alarms silent to the void, but screaming on its bridge shrieked a song of total system failure. The great weapon was eating itself from the inside out. Koth Voral watched in disbelief as his instrument of absolute power became his tomb. The destruction of the inevitable verdict was not clean like its predecessor. It convulsed energy arcing from its spine before its central power core detonated in a slow, magnificent cataclysm that tore the heart out of the Cathar formation. The Grand Armada was broken. The Hive-Mind, its ego erased, shattered completely. The remaining hundreds of Cathar ships were no longer a single entity. They were a panicked, disconnected mob, each one an individual mind, waking up from a century-long dream alone and terrified in the dark. Their doctrine was not just broken, it had been erased. On the bridge of the accountability, the crew watched in stunned silence. The cost had been a frigate and its 150 souls. The cost for the Cathar had been their entire identity. A single death is a tragedy. A billion is a choice. Rostova closed her eyes for a moment, honoring the crew of the Steadfast. Their names were now etched onto the ledger she kept in her own heart. She opened them again, her gaze clear and cold. The work was not done. Argos, she said, her voice soft but unwavering. Open a channel to all the remaining Cathar vessels. Patch me through. The disconnected Cathar captains, now adrift in a sea of confusion, found their comms systems activating. Rostova's face appeared on their screens. She looked tired, but her resolve was an anchor in their storm. You are now free, she said, her voice devoid of triumph. Your connection to the Ascendancy's doctrine is severed. Your supreme overlord is gone. The ultimatum is over. She let them absorb the words. We will not fire on you. We will not pursue you. We are broadcasting the route to your home territories. Go home. Rebuild. Find a new way. A way that does not require you to balance your books with the lives of others. She paused, letting her final point settle. The galaxy is watching. The ledger of this day is now public record. Your Ascendancy's ultimatum doctrine has been declared a crime against sentient life by the Galactic Concordium. The choice to adhere to it is now an act of piracy. The choice is now yours as individuals. They offered not vengeance, but a blank page. One by one, the Cathar ships, scarred and leaderless, began to turn. Their movements were ragged, uncertain. They formed ragged convoys, small groups of survivors clinging to each other for direction. They limped away from the Kepler Truss, leaving behind the wreckage of their godship and the ghost of their shattered faith. On the Kepler Truss, the broadcast of faces had stopped. It was replaced by a single static image, the official seal of the Galactic Concordium. Below it, a tally updated in real time as every Cathar ship activated its FTL drive to begin the journey home, each departure a public concession to the new precedent. Rostova watched the last of the Cathar ships warp away into the darkness. The great mirror arrays of her fleet, having shown the enemy their own souls, now cooled to a dull pewter gray in the light of the Kepler star. The battle was over. The lesson was complete. The ultimatum doctrine was not merely defeated, it was obsolete. It had been weighed on the scales of a public ledger and found wanting its final cost, tallied not in ships destroyed, but in the truth revealed. The universe had been taught that the value of a single life was a number greater than any fleet, and that a reckoning could be delivered not with a sword, but with a mirror held up to the truth. They came to write an ending. We taught them how to begin again.